It's just asset reallocation." The words hung in the air, colder than the polished concrete floor of their living room. My daughter-in-law, Brittany, didn't even look up from her phone as she said it, as if discussing some abstract number in a stock portfolio and not my home. The home I had lived in for 40 years. My son, David, stood by the massive floor-to-ceiling window, looking out at his perfectly manicured Austin backyard. He had that same detached tone I was starting to know too well. "We're pivoting the family portfolio, Mom," he said, finally turning to face me. There wasn't a hint of warmth in his eyes, only the sharp glint of calculation. "And frankly, your house is an underperforming asset." Underperforming asset. That's what my life's work had become, not the place I'd paid off with decades of overtime as an IRS auditor, not the walls that held every memory of his childhood, not the single biggest thing I owned. It was just an inconvenient number on a spreadsheet that was dragging down their net worth. I stared at them, my brilliant son, the tech CEO whose dream I had personally funded, and his influencer wife, who curated her life with the same ruthless efficiency she was now applying to mine. The sheer, breathtaking audacity of it stole the air from my lungs. But that explosion was just the final crack in a foundation that had been crumbling for years. To understand how my home became an asset and my love became a liability, you have to understand the investment I made in the first place. To understand how my home became an asset and my love became a liability, you have to understand the investment I made in the first place. It wasn't just a house, it was a lifetime of careful, calculated choices, all of which I undid 7 years ago with a single phone call. The memory is as clear as the glass paperweight on my old desk. I was sitting in my home office, the same one I'd worked from for the last decade of my career with the IRS. Everything in that room had its place. The pencils were sharpened, the files were color-coded, and my old, heavy-duty adding machine sat in the corner like a loyal old dog. My entire life was built on order, on predictable outcomes. You put in the work, you save your money, you follow the rules, and you build a secure future. It was the American promise I'd bought into, and for 40 years it had paid off. On the phone was my financial advisor, Mark, a good kid I'd known since he was bagging my groceries at H-E-B. His voice, usually so confident, was full of hesitation. "Carol, I have the transfer paperwork ready," he said, "but I have to ask you one more time if you're absolutely sure." $75,000. That's a significant portion of your $401K. This is your nest egg. This is your security. I looked at the picture on my desk. It was of David, age 10, grinning with a missing front tooth and holding up a blue ribbon from the science fair. He'd built a potato-powered clock. Even then, he had this spark, this belief that he could create something out of nothing. Mark saw numbers on a page, a withdrawal that broke every rule of sensible retirement planning. I saw my son's face, lit up with the fire of his next big idea. What good was a nest egg if the one person you built it for couldn't fly? "I'm sure, Mark," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "It's an investment." It was the word David had used. 2 nights earlier, he had sat right across from me at my small kitchen table, the same table where I'd helped him with his algebra homework. He was a man now, 30 years old, crackling with an energy that seemed too big for my quiet little house. He'd unrolled a business plan, his hands moving excitedly as he talked about algorithms and server capacity and user acquisition. "Mom, this isn't just an app," he'd said, his eyes shining. "It's a revolution in local logistics. We're going to be the next Uber, the next Amazon, but for small businesses. We're giving the little guy a fighting chance." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "The venture capitalists are interested, really interested, but they want to see a fully functional prototype. They want to see skin in the game. This isn't a handout, it's a seed investment. I'll pay you back tenfold, I swear. You won't just be my mom, you'll be a founding investor." He painted a picture of a future so bright it was blinding. He spoke of stock options, of an IPO, of me never having to worry about money again. But it wasn't the money that moved me. It was the idea of being a part of his dream, of giving him the one push he needed to change the world. After his father left, it had just been the two of us against the world. I had worked every hour of overtime I could get, not for a bigger house or a nicer car, but for his debate camps, his computer classes, his college tuition. Every sacrifice was a brick in the foundation of his future. This felt like the capstone. An investment in my son is the only nest egg I care about, I told Mark, echoing the words I'd told myself 100 times. Okay, Carol, he sighed, the sound of professional resignation. I'll execute the transfer. The funds should be in his account by morning. After I hung up, the silence in my office felt enormous. My gaze fell on my old adding machine. For 40 years, that machine had been my tool. Solid, mechanical, predictable. Every key press was a known quantity, a tangible entry in a ledger that always had to balance. My entire career was about finding the patterns, the logic, the place where the numbers told the truth. But this was different. This wasn't logic, it was faith. I had just bet a huge piece of my carefully constructed future on my son's dream. I had traded the rigid certainty of a 401 for the chaotic, terrifying hope of a startup. And in that moment, for a mother who had given everything to see her son succeed, it felt like the safest, most logical bet in the world. I had no idea that the foundation I was laying wasn't for his success, but for my own ruin. That foundation I was laying wasn't for his success, but for my own ruin, and the first signs of that ruin didn't look like ruin at all. They looked like success. 5 years after I drained my 401, David's app, Fetch It, had taken off. He was the golden boy of the Austin tech scene, and with that success came Brittany. I met her, really met her, 2 years ago at a backyard barbecue at their new house, a sprawling glass and steel box in a neighborhood where the driveways were wider than my entire front yard. The Texas sun beat down, but everything felt coolly impersonal, from the sleek, minimalist outdoor furniture to the enormous stainless steel Traeger grill humming in the corner. It wasn't the warm, smoky smell of a real barbecue. It was the sterile scent of expensive, automated perfection. David had lost weight and gained a certain polish, wearing a linen shirt that probably cost more than my monthly grocery bill, but he seemed managed. His smiles were quick flashes for Brittany's phone, which was always out, always recording. She was a lifestyle influencer, a job I didn't fully understand, but it seemed to involve documenting every curated moment of their perfect life for thousands of strangers. I'd brought my famous potato salad in my old Tupperware container, and it looked heartbreakingly out of place on a marble countertop laden with artisanal cheeses and charcuterie boards. I watched as Brittany moved through the party, not talking to people so much as framing them for her next Instagram story. Her laughter was a bright, sharp sound designed to be recorded. Trying to find my footing, to feel like a mother in my son's home, I walked over to the grill where David was checking the temperature on his phone. "That brisket smells wonderful, honey," I said. "It reminds me of the recipe your grandma taught me. The secret is the coffee and the rub. If you want, I can." Before I could finish, Brittany glided over, placing a perfectly manicured hand on David's arm. "Oh, that's so sweet, Carol," she said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "But this is a special pre-marinated brisket from a boutique butcher downtown. It's all about a premium flavor profile for the brand. For the brand. Not for us, not for family, not for the simple joy of a shared meal. The brisket wasn't food, it was content." David just nodded, his eyes flicking from Brittany to his phone. "Yeah, Mom, Brit's got it handled. It's all part of the new system." I felt a quiet, cold knot form in my stomach. I was no longer the keeper of the family's secrets, the recipes, the stories. I was a relic from an older, less premium system. I retreated to a chair in the shade and watched. I watched as David followed Brittany's subtle cues, a tilt of her head, a glance at a guest like an employee following a manager's directions. I saw him hold up a craft beer for her to photograph, the label perfectly facing the camera. This wasn't a partnership, it was a merger, and he was not the majority shareholder. Later, when the brisket was finally served on rustic wooden platters, Brittany gathered a small audience. She held up her phone, hit record, and took a theatrical bite. "Oh my God, you guys," she cooed to her unseen followers. "You have to see this," she chewed thoughtfully, then looked directly into the lens. "See? Sometimes you just have to upgrade from the family recipe to get that premium flavor." She winked. The handful of people around her laughed politely. David smiled, a proud, vacant expression on his face. No one looked at me. No one seemed to notice the quiet cruelty of the remark, the casual way she had erased 40 years of family tradition with a single, branded soundbite. I set my fork down on my plate. The small clink of metal on ceramic was the only protest I had left. My whole career, I had audited companies, looking for inconsistencies, for the small lies that pointed to a bigger fraud. I would sit for hours, sifting through ledgers and receipts, my old adding machine clicking away, until the true story revealed itself. And sitting there, surrounded by the evidence of my son's new life, I started doing what I'd always done. I started an audit. The asset was David's success. The liability was me, the old-fashioned mother with her Tupperware and her family recipes, the one who represented his humble beginnings, a past that didn't fit the new brand. And the new management, Brittany, was clearly in the process of phasing out that liability. I picked up my fork again and took a bite of the premium brisket. It was tender, perfectly cooked, and it tasted like absolutely nothing at all. The brisket was tender, perfectly cooked, and it tasted like absolutely nothing at all. That became the flavor of the next 2 years, a bland emptiness hiding behind a glossy, premium facade. The visits became less frequent, replaced by text messages filled with corporate speak about optimizing schedules and bandwidth issues. When David did call, his voice was distant, echoing from a world of boardrooms and investor meetings I couldn't picture. The boy I had raised was being systematically replaced by the brand he was building. Then, one Tuesday afternoon in late October, my doorbell rang. It was David, and he was alone. That was the first red flag. He never came alone anymore. He looked thinner, and the expensive linen shirt he wore was rumpled, as if he'd slept in it. The confident tech CEO polish was gone, replaced by a frayed, anxious energy that reminded me of his college exam weeks. He bypassed the living room and went straight to the kitchen, pouring himself a glass of water with a hand that trembled slightly. He didn't meet my eyes. "Everything okay, honey?" I asked, my heart doing a familiar painful squeeze. "Yeah, Mom, everything's great, fantastic," he said, the words coming out too fast. He took a long drink of water, his back still to me. "The company's growing like crazy. We're about to close a Series B round of funding. It's huge. We're talking 8 figures. My old auditor's brain immediately translated that. "We don't have the money yet." He finally turned, forcing a smile that looked more like a grimace. "It's just, there's a temporary cash flow crunch. A gap. The new funding doesn't clear for another month, and I've got payroll for 30 employees due this Friday. The VCs get spooked if you miss payroll. It's a bad look." There it was. I stood there, wiping my hands on my apron, a motion I must have made 1,000 times in that kitchen. For 40 years, my job was to listen to stories like this. Stories full of big promises and small, inconvenient gaps in the numbers. I knew the language of financial desperation like a second tongue. "How much of a gap?" I asked, my voice even. 20,000, he said, the number landing on my kitchen counter like a lead weight. "It's a bridge loan, that's all, just to get us to the end of the month. I'll pay you back the day the funding closes, with interest. Whatever you want." I looked at my son, the man whose face was on tech blogs, and all I could see was the little boy who once came to me with a broken toy, his eyes wide with panic, believing I could fix anything. My professional instincts were screaming. Unsecured loan, no paperwork, high risk. My old adding machine felt like a ghost in the other room, a silent monument to a world of logic and proof that no longer applied. In that world, this was a terrible, reckless decision. But in this world, in my kitchen, my son was asking for my help. I took a breath. "Okay, David, but let's just write up a simple promissory note, just for the sake of good bookkeeping." The change in him was immediate. The desperate son vanished, replaced by an offended stranger. He scoffed, a short, sharp sound of disbelief. "A promissory note? Mom, seriously?" He took a step back, creating a chasm between us. "This is me. We're family, not a bank. I can't believe you'd even ask that. After everything—" He let the words hang there, the unspoken accusation clear. "After I let you invest in my dream, you don't trust me?" He was using my love as leverage, and we both knew it. He was making my sensible request feel like a personal betrayal. I felt my resolve crumble, the careful auditor in me silenced by the heartbroken mother. "You're right," I said quietly, the words tasting like ash. "Of course, it's just old habits." His relief was palpable. The charm returned instantly. Thanks, Mom. You're a lifesaver. You have no idea what this means. I walked into my office and sat down at my computer, the screen glowing in the dim afternoon light. He stood behind me, a little too close, as I navigated to my online savings account, the one I'd been slowly, painstakingly rebuilding. With a few clicks, I transferred $20,000. The confirmation screen felt like a final judgment. He gave me a quick, distracted hug on his way out the door, his mind already back on his funding rounds and payroll. I'll call you tomorrow, he promised. He didn't. After the sound of his Tesla faded down the street, I stood in the silence of my house for a long time. The transaction had been frictionless, digital, unreal. But the ache in my chest was heavy and solid. I went back to my desk, but I didn't close the banking window. Instead, I opened a new file, a simple, clean spreadsheet. At the top, in bold letters, I typed D. Miller, loan account. I created columns: date, amount, purpose, repayment status. I clicked on the first empty cell under date and entered today's date. In the next column, $20,000. Under purpose, I wrote bridge loan, payroll, and in the final column, the one I labeled notes, I typed with a calm, steady hand, verbal repayment promise, 30 days. I saved the file to a secure, encrypted folder on my hard drive. Looking at the neat, orderly row of data on my screen, I felt a strange sense of peace. The mother in me had just been manipulated. The investor had made a terrible decision. But the auditor had just opened a new case file. The auditor in me had just opened a new case file, and over the next 2 years, I filled it with entries. The 30-day repayment deadline for the bridge loan came and went, marked in my spreadsheet with a simple, damning entry: status unpaid. When I gently brought it up a month later, David was all breezy reassurances. "Oh yeah, Mom, things are just crazy. The money's tied up in escrow. You know how it is." I didn't, but I logged the excuse in the notes column. More entries followed. Another $5,000 for an emergency server upgrade, $3,000 for a team-building retreat in Napa that looked suspiciously like a vacation on Brittany's Instagram. Each time, the promises were lavish, and the follow-through was non-existent. My savings account, the one I had so carefully rebuilt, dwindled. My spreadsheet grew. It was a quiet, meticulous accounting of my own erasure. The final, and most damning, entry was logged on a sweltering August afternoon. It had started with a gift. 6 months earlier, David and Brittany had insisted on upgrading my security, installing a full smart home system keypad lock on the front door, motion sensors, cameras, all controlled by an app on my phone. "It's for your safety, Mom," David had said, beaming. Peace of mind. Brittany had filmed the whole installation for a sponsored post about caring for our elders with tech. That afternoon, a wave of dizziness washed over me as I was watering my plants. The room tilted, my vision swam with black spots. It felt like my blood sugar had plummeted. Leaning against the kitchen counter, my heart thumping a frightened rhythm against my ribs, I reached for my phone to call David. I just needed to hear his voice, maybe have him talk me through it. The call went straight to voicemail. His message was slick and professional, no longer the goofy greeting he'd had for years. I tried again. Declined. A moment later, a text message popped up on my screen. It was from him. "Having a crisis again, Mom. Can't talk. In Cabo." Followed by a palm tree emoji. A crisis again, as if my concern was an annoying, recurring bug in his perfectly optimized life. I stared at the message, the words blurring through the haze in my head. I needed help. Not a big deal, just a glass of orange juice and to sit down for a minute. But the sudden feeling of being utterly alone was more disorienting than the dizziness. I decided to call my neighbor, Sharon. But as I was about to dial, a notification banner slid across the top of my phone's screen. It was from the smart home app they'd installed. Alert. You have been removed as an administrator for the Miller residence smart home system. I blinked, trying to make sense of it. Removed? I tapped on the app. It asked for a login I no longer had. My access was gone. A cold dread, far sharper than any physical symptom, sliced through me. I stumbled to the front door, my hand shaking as I fumbled with the keypad. I typed in my code. A series of angry, high-pitched beeps was the only response, followed by a robotic voice. Access denied. I was locked in. Panic, cold and absolute, seized me. I was a prisoner in my own home, the digital walls erected by my own son. The peace of mind he had gifted me was a cage. I looked at the security panel by the door, its single red light blinking steadily, impassively. It was no longer a symbol of safety, but of surveillance, of control. My house wasn't mine anymore. It was just the Miller residence, a remote asset to be managed. In that moment, the last of the loving, forgiving mother in me died. The auditor took over completely. This wasn't neglect. This wasn't forgetfulness. This was a deliberate act. This was a hostile takeover. They had cut off my access, isolated me, asserted their power in the most profound way possible. They were testing the system, seeing how much control they could exert before I broke. My dizziness was gone, replaced by a terrifying, glacial clarity. I sat at my kitchen table for an hour, watching the red light blink. Blink, blink, blink. A steady digital heartbeat counting down to something. I didn't know what, but I knew I had to be ready. Later that evening, my access was silently restored. No explanation, no apology. It was a power play, pure and simple. I went into my office, the familiar scent of old paper, and ordered a small comfort in the chaos. I sat down at my computer, the glow of the screen illuminating my face. I opened the encrypted folder, opened the spreadsheet. I created a new tab at the bottom, and I named it Incidents. In the first row, I entered the date. Under description, I typed, access to home security system remotely revoked for 1 hour after request for assistance. Under supporting evidence, I wrote, screenshot of text message and system notification saved. My old adding machine sat in the corner, a relic of a bygone era of tangible numbers and balanced ledgers. I had spent a lifetime making sure things added up. Now, my son's actions had created a debt that could never be repaid with money. And I knew, with the chilling certainty of a final audit, that a day of reckoning was coming. I was going to make sure the final balance was paid in full. The day of reckoning came, as it always does, not with a storm of anger, but with the quiet click of a luxury briefcase opening on my coffee table. It was the Tuesday we are now living in, the moment that began this story. They sat on my sofa, the one I had bought at a garage sale 20 years ago and reupholstered myself. They looked completely out of place, two sleek figures of modern success dropped into a life of quiet, analog history. David was in what I now thought of as his founder uniform, a crisp, dark t-shirt that was probably more expensive than my entire outfit, and a watch that gleamed under the lamplight. Brittany was beside him, her posture perfect, her expression a careful blend of empathy and authority. It was the face she used in her videos when she talked about setting healthy boundaries. "Mom, we wanted to talk to you about the future," David began, his tone serious and rehearsed. He slid a thick, leather-bound folder across the table. "We've been working with our estate planner, and we've come up with a solution that's going to protect you. It's going to simplify everything." Brittany leaned forward, placing her hand over his, a gesture of support for the camera that wasn't there. "What David means, Carol, is that we worry. This house, the finances, the bills, it's a lot for you to manage. We want to take that burden off your shoulders so you can just enjoy your retirement." The word hung in the air between us. Burden. I said nothing. I just looked at the folder. Inside my head, my old adding machine was clattering away, tallying up the unpaid loans, the broken promises, the calculated cruelties. Its mechanical clicks were a world away from the slick, silent efficiency of their plan. David opened the folder, revealing a sheaf of documents filled with dense, legal language. He turned it so I could see the title at the top of the first page, "The Miller Family Revocable Living Trust." "It's pretty straightforward," he said, tapping a perfectly manicured finger on the page. "We put all your assets, the house, your savings, your retirement accounts into a trust. I'll be the trustee. It just means I'll handle the administration, paying the property taxes, managing the investments, all of it. Nothing really changes for you day to day, but it protects your legacy from probate court and, any unforeseen complications." His voice was smooth, persuasive. The same voice he'd used to sell me on his seed investment all those years ago. Brittany chimed in, her voice soft and soothing. Think of it as an upgrade, Carol. We're streamlining your life. It's what any loving family would do. It's just smart legacy planning. I looked at their faces, so earnest, so full of what they wanted me to believe was concern. They had packaged the theft of my life into the language of love and responsibility. They were foreclosing on my independence and calling it a gift. They weren't just taking my house. They were taking my name, my signature, my legal right to exist as a competent adult, and consolidating it all under their own brand. I ran my finger along the chipped edge of my coffee table. I remembered buying it for $5, and the satisfaction of sanding it down, staining the wood, bringing it back to life with my own 2 hands. Everything in this house had a story, a history of work and care. To them, it was just an asset to be managed, a problem to be streamlined. I finally reached for the documents, my movements slow and deliberate. I picked them up. The paper was heavy, expensive. I could feel the weight of their ambition, their greed. I pretended to read the first page, my eyes scanning the words without taking them in. Trustor, trustee, beneficiary. It was the language of a hostile takeover. I see, I said, my voice quiet. I placed the papers back on the table. You've really thought of everything. Relief washed over their faces. They had been expecting a fight, tears, an emotional scene. My quiet compliance was something they hadn't prepared for, and they mistook it for surrender. We knew you'd understand, Mom, David said, his smile finally looking genuine. It's for the best. It's a lot to take in, I said, looking from him to Brittany. I let a moment of silence pass, allowing them to savor their victory. Then I looked back at the folder. Okay, I said. The word was small, but it landed with the force of a gavel. Their victory was complete. Or so they thought. I stood up. Before I sign anything, I said, my voice perfectly calm, I need to go over my own financial records with you, just to make sure all the numbers are in order for the transfer. It's the auditor in me. I gave them a small, weak smile. I need the ledger to be balanced. I need the ledger to be balanced. David let out a small, indulgent sigh, the kind you give a child who insists on a pointless ritual. Of course, Mom, he said, glancing at Brittany. She gave a tight, patient smile in return. They saw it as my final, quirky act of resistance, a little bit of old-fashioned bookkeeping before I signed my life over to their sleek, modern efficiency. They thought they were humoring me. They had no idea they were attending their own audit. It will just take a minute, I said, walking into my office. I came back with my simple work laptop and an HDMI cable. The house was so technologically advanced that every room had a port, another one of their upgrades. As I knelt to plug the cable into the wall, David moved to help. Here, Mom, let me get that. I've got it, I said, my voice leaving no room for argument. I connected the cable to my laptop with a satisfying click. This was my process. For 40 years, I had walked into boardrooms and offices, a quiet woman with a briefcase, and connected to their systems. I'd faced down arrogant CEOs and slick CFOs who saw me as nothing more than a box-ticking bureaucrat. They always underestimated the quiet woman. They always thought they were smarter, faster, more modern. And I would sit, patiently, while my old adding machine clicked away, until the truth, in all its beautiful, irrefutable logic, revealed itself. David and Brittany were no different. They just happened to be family. With the connection made, I sat back down in my armchair, the laptop warm on my lap. I used the remote to switch the input on their massive, wall-mounted smart TV. The screen, which a moment before had been displaying an artfully minimalist nature scene, flickered and then mirrored my computer's desktop. It was a simple background, a picture of the bluebonnets that grow along the Texas highways in the spring. There were only a few icons. David and Brittany watched, their boredom barely concealed. They were expecting a messy Quicken file or a confusing Excel spreadsheet that I'd need help navigating. I moved the cursor across the screen. It felt enormous, powerful. I ignored the folder labeled Finances and the one labeled Family Photos. Instead, I moved the arrow to a single, stark folder icon in the center of the screen. Beneath it, in a clean, sans-serif font, were 2 words. Project Nightingale. I double-clicked. The name was the first shock. It wasn't Mom's stuff or Carol's documents. It was a project name. It was formal, cold, and utterly alien in the context of our family. I saw Brittany's perfectly relaxed posture stiffen. David leaned forward slightly, his brows knitting together in confusion. The folder opened, and its contents filled the 80-inch screen. It wasn't a jumble of random files. It was a directory, organized with the clean, ruthless logic of a federal investigation. A list of subfolders appeared, each with a clear, damning title: Loan Agreements, Unpaid. Voicemail, Recordings. Security, Cam. Logs, Text, Message, Archives. Brittany, Brand, Expenditures. Incident, Reports. The silence in the room became absolute. The only sound was the faint hum of the air conditioning. David and Brittany stared at the screen, their faces frozen. The color drained from David's cheeks. Brittany's hand, which had been resting on his knee, slowly retracted. They read the list, and then they read it again, the dawning horror moving across their features like a shadow. "Mom, what is this?" David's voice was a hoarse whisper. I didn't answer him. The evidence would speak for itself. My finger tapped the trackpad, and the cursor moved with calm precision to the first folder: Loan, Agreements, Unpaid. I clicked. The spreadsheet I had so carefully maintained for 2 years filled the screen. It was no longer a small, private file. It was a billboard of their deceit. Every loan, every date, every broken promise was displayed in crystal clarity. The final line item, the $20,000 bridge loan, and was at the bottom, the cell in the repayment status column glowing in a pale, clinical red that seemed to pulse in the silent room. David stared at it, his mouth slightly agape. He looked from the screen to me, and back again, his mind clearly struggling to reconcile the image of his compliant, technologically clumsy mother with the cold, hard data of his betrayal displayed for all to see. This wasn't a mother's scrapbook of grievances. This was an auditor's case file, and the audit was just beginning. The audit was just beginning. I moved the cursor away from the loan spreadsheet, the red unpaid status still burning on the screen. I navigated back to the main directory and clicked on the folder labeled Voicemail, Recordings. A list of audio files appeared, each one time-stamped. "You called this a temporary cash flow crunch, David," I said, my voice as level as a courtroom testimony. My eyes never left the screen. "You said the funding was guaranteed." I clicked on a file dated 6 weeks after he'd taken the $20,000. A waveform graphic appeared on the TV as the audio began to play. It was David's voice, but not the one he used with me. This was his CEO voice, confident, a little arrogant. He'd accidentally pocket-dialed me, leaving a 30-second voicemail of his conversation. "No, the Series B is on the ropes." His recorded voice echoed through my living room. "The numbers are soft. We're burning through cash. Just tell the partners whatever you have to. We need to project strength." I hit stop. The silence that followed was heavy, thick with the sound of his lie being exposed. Brittany shot a venomous glare at David, a silent, furious accusation. He just stared at the screen, his face a mask of disbelief. "My job was to find discrepancies," I continued, my tone unchanged. "To find the story the numbers were trying to tell. Your numbers told me you were in trouble. Your words told me you were a liar." I closed the audio file. Next, I opened security cam logs. "You said the smart home system was for my peace of mind," I said, looking at Brittany for the first time. "It turns out it was for mine, too." A video file opened. The view was from the small camera I'd placed in my own office, disguised as a USB charger. The timestamp showed it was from a month ago, during one of their brief, obligatory visits. The video showed Brittany, alone in my office, opening the drawers of my desk. She wasn't stealing anything. She was looking for something. She picked up a stack of bank statements, her eyes scanning them quickly before putting them back. She was conducting her own audit. Brittany let out a small, strangled gasp. "I was just looking for a pen." My pen cup, with 10 pens in it, was on top of the desk. I stated, not bothering to look at her. "You were looking for financial documents. You were assessing the value of the asset you were planning to acquire." The clinical corporate language hit them like a slap. I wasn't a mother anymore. I was the opposition in a hostile takeover. I clicked on the next folder, the one that made Brittany flinch. Brittany, Brand, Expenditures. The screen split into two columns. On the left, I displayed a series of screenshots of text messages from David. Mom, emergency, server crashed. Need $5K by noon. Mom, the caterer for the investor meeting needs a deposit. Can you help? $3K. On the right, I displayed corresponding screenshots from Brittany's Instagram feed, all posted within hours of the emergencies. A new Givenchy handbag, captioned "Number Treat Yourself." A lavish brunch at a 5-star hotel, with champagne glasses clinking. Celebrating a successful week, number Boss Babe. Every emergency for the company, I narrated calmly, coincided with a significant non-essential personal purchase. My retirement savings weren't funding your servers, David. They were funding your wife's brand. This was the final, devastating blow. This was the irrefutable link between their deception and their greed. David finally broke. He slumped forward, burying his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking. Brittany was rigid, her face pale, her carefully constructed image shattering on the 80-inch screen in front of her. I let the evidence hang in the air for a long, painful moment. My old adding machine had sat in the corner of my office for decades, a tangible symbol of cause and effect, of debts and payments. This was its digital equivalent. This was their bill. I call this my investor's report on a failing enterprise, I said, the words dropping like stones into the silence. An enterprise built on fraud, managed with contempt, and destined for collapse. I closed the folder. I had shown them the audit. Now it was time for the liquidation. My cursor moved to the final file on my desktop, one they hadn't even noticed. It was a single PDF document. I double-clicked it. The formal, legal crest of a law firm appeared, followed by the title they had presented to me just 30 minutes earlier, but with one crucial difference: the Carol Miller Irrevocable Trust. You were right about one thing, I said, my voice resonating with a finality that was absolute. It was time to protect my legacy. David looked up, his eyes red-rimmed and panicked. Brittany stared, uncomprehending. The trust you showed me was a proposal. This, I said, tapping my laptop, is the reality. It was executed and filed this morning. I looked directly at my son. As the primary investor in your career and, it seems, your marriage, I've done what any sensible founder would do when their primary investment turns toxic. I've decided to divest. I scrolled to the signature page, my own name written in a clear, strong hand beside the notary's seal. My entire estate, including this underperforming asset of a house, now funds the Carol Miller Women in Tech Scholarship at the University of Texas at Austin. The first deposit will be made upon the sale of this property, effective immediately. The first deposit will be made upon the sale of this property, effective immediately. The words settled in the dead air of the living room, not with the heat of an argument, but with the cold, hard finality of a judgment. David and Brittany were still staring at the screen, at the legal document that had just vaporized their future. They looked like statues, frozen in the first moment of a car crash before the pain has registered. I didn't wait for them to speak. My work wasn't finished. I turned my attention back to my laptop, my movements calm and methodical. With a few clicks, I opened my email client. I composed a new message. The to field I populated with a single powerful name, Arthur Vance, the lead venture capitalist at the firm backing David's company. I knew his name because I'd researched all of David's key investors months ago. A good auditor always knows who sits on the board. The subject line was simple: fiduciary misconduct regarding seed investor Carol Miller. The body of the email was even simpler. Dear Mr. Vance, attached, please find a summary report detailing a series of fraudulent activities and misappropriation of funds by Fetchit CEO David Miller. As the primary seed investor in this enterprise, I believe this information is material to the board's oversight responsibilities. Sincerely, Carol Miller, CPA, retired. I attached a condensed, 2-page version of my investor's report. Then, with a final steady click, I hit send. The soft swoosh sound from my laptop speakers was the starting gun. At that exact instant, as if triggered by my email, a phone began to buzz. It was David's, vibrating on the glass coffee table with a frantic, angry energy. He flinched, his eyes wide with a new, more immediate terror. He fumbled for the phone, his hands shaking so badly he almost dropped it. The screen lit up with Arthur Vance's name. David stared at it, his face ashen. He looked at me, his expression a silent, desperate plea. "Don't answer it," his eyes begged. "Make it go away." But it wouldn't go away. Before he could decline the call, another one came through, then another. A cascade of calls from numbers I knew he had saved as board member and COO. His professional life was trying to break down the door. Then came the second wave. Brittany's phone, lying beside his, began to vibrate. It wasn't just a call, it was a sustained, violent shudder, as if the device itself were having a seizure. The screen became a waterfall of notifications, an avalanche of digital condemnation. Instagram comments, Twitter mentions, push alerts from news apps. Through the blur, I could read snippets of text. Disgusting. Unsubscribed. How could you steal from his mother? Number fetch it fraud. You're not a number boss, babe. You're a parasite. Brittany snatched the phone, her thumb swiping frantically. She let out a small, wounded cry as she saw the source. A local Austin tech blogger, a sharp young woman who happened to be my neighbor Sharon's niece, had just published an article. Her phone screen showed the headline, big and bold and brutal. Startup founder defrauds his own mother. The ultimate bad faith investment. The article was already going viral. Brittany's curated world of perfect brunches and designer handbags was being set on fire by the very audience she had so carefully cultivated. Her brand, her only real asset, was becoming toxic in real time. She looked up from her phone, her face a ruin of comprehension. The influencer was being influenced, canceled by a tidal wave of public opinion she had no power to control. "Make it stop," she whispered, the words barely audible. "Carol, please, make it stop." But I had no control over this. I hadn't created this storm, I had simply reported the weather. This was the market correction. For years they had operated on the belief that their actions had no consequences, that their lies were a form of currency, that my love was an infinite line of credit. But the ledger always balances. David's phone was still ringing, a relentless shrieking alarm he couldn't turn off. He finally silenced it, his hands clumsy. He looked around my quiet, orderly living room as if seeing it for the first time. He wasn't in a boardroom now. There were no slick presentations or confident projections to hide behind. There was only the evidence, the consequences, and the quiet, retired auditor who had brought his whole world crashing down around him. The buzzing of their phones was the only sound, a swarm of angry digital insects filling the void. It was so different from the sound I had known my whole life, the steady, mechanical clack, clack, clack of my old adding machine. That machine represented a world of tangible proof, of debts that had to be paid. For a while, I thought that world was gone. But I was wrong. It had just been waiting for the final accounts to be settled. The buzzing of their phones was the only sound, a swarm of angry digital insects filling the void. It was so different from the sound I had known my whole life, the steady, mechanical clack, clack, clack of my old adding machine. That machine represented a world of tangible proof, of debts that had to be paid. For a while, I thought that world was gone. But I was wrong. It had just been waiting for the final accounts to be settled. They left my house that day, not with a fight, but with the stunned, shuffling gait of survivors walking away from a wreckage. The weeks that followed were quiet. The noise of their public downfall reached me only in echoes, a headline I'd see at the grocery store checkout, a snippet of conversation from my neighbor Sharon. David was fired from his own company. Brittany deleted all her social media accounts and, I heard, moved back to California to live with her parents. Their sleek, minimalist house in the hills went up for sale with a motivated seller tag. I spent those weeks in my own quiet world. I started cleaning out the closets, bagging up old clothes for Goodwill. I repotted my geraniums. I sat in my office and watched the dust motes dance in the afternoon sun, feeling the simple, profound peace of a balanced ledger. Then, one Saturday morning, my doorbell rang. I opened it to find David standing on my porch. He was almost unrecognizable. The expensive tailored t-shirt was replaced by a wrinkled polo shirt that hung loosely on his frame. He was unshaven, with deep, dark circles under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights. The confident posture of the CEO was gone, leaving a man who seemed to be struggling to hold himself upright. He wasn't driving the Tesla. A dusty 10-year-old Honda Civic was parked at the curb. He just stood there for a moment, looking at me, his eyes filled with a weary shame I had never seen in him before. "Hi, Mom," he said. His voice was raspy, stripped of its usual charm and authority. I didn't invite him in. I didn't smile. I just waited. The auditor waits for the subject to present their case. Tears welled in his eyes, but he blinked them back, refusing to let them fall. "I lost everything," he said, the words a simple statement of fact. "The company, the house. Brittany left me last week." He took a ragged breath. "She said I was a bad investment." The irony was so thick it was almost suffocating. He finally looked me in the eye. "I came here to say, I'm sorry." It wasn't the kind of apology he'd ever given before. It wasn't a strategic move to get something. It was the raw, stripped-down confession of a man with nothing left to lose. "You weren't just my mom," he continued, his voice cracking. "You were my first and best investor. You gave me my seed funding when no one else would. And I betrayed your trust. I ran the business into the ground with my arrogance and my greed." He wasn't just apologizing for being a bad son. He was finally speaking my language. He was acknowledging the real crime, the one that went beyond a mother's broken heart. He understood the fiduciary duty he had violated. He reached into the back pocket of his jeans and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was creased and worn. He handed it to me. It isn't much. It's a start." I unfolded it. It was a legally binding document, a personal repayment plan he must have drafted with a public defender or a legal aid lawyer. It detailed every dollar he had taken from me, from the initial $75,000 to the final $5,000 server emergency. It outlined a schedule of payments, small at first, based on the minimum wage job he'd apparently taken at a fulfillment center. It would take him the rest of his life to pay it back. I looked at the document, at the desperate, meticulous accounting of his own sins. This was his attempt to balance the ledger. I folded the paper and held it in my hand. He watched my face, searching for a sign of forgiveness, of the old maternal softness he had always been able to count on. "This isn't for me, David," I said, my voice not unkind but firm. "This is for you." He looked confused. "But it's your money. I owe you." "A good founder always pays their debts," I said, the words echoing a lifetime of my own principles, not to satisfy the investor, but to restore their own integrity. "This is your audit, your chance to make your own books balance." I stepped back, my hand on the doorknob. The message was clear. The meeting was over. "Mom, please," he whispered, a final broken plea. I looked at the man who was my son, but also a stranger. I had loved him with the fierce, irrational hope of a mother. I had audited him with the cold, irrefutable logic of my profession. And now, I was liquidating the last of my emotional investment. Forgiveness without consequences wasn't love. It was just bad accounting. "Goodbye, David," I said. And I closed the door. And I closed the door. I stood there for a long time, my hand still on the knob, listening to the sound of his footsteps fading away, followed by the tired cough of an old car engine starting up, and then silence. It was a new kind of quiet. Not the lonely silence I had grown used to, but a clean, expansive quiet. It was the sound of a ledger that had finally been balanced, the last debt accounted for. The house felt lighter, as if it could finally breathe again. It felt like mine again. That was 6 months ago. Today, I'm sitting in a bustling coffee shop just off the UT Austin campus, the air thick with the smell of dark roast coffee and the low murmur of 100 conversations. Sunlight streams through the big front window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. For so many years, my world was my small, quiet house. Now, my world is this. It's the vibrant, chaotic energy of young people chasing their own dreams. Across from me, a young woman named Maya is talking, her hands moving with the same restless energy my son once had. She's the first recipient of the Carol Miller Women in Tech Scholarship. She's sharp, funny, and has an idea for an app that crackles with so much potential it almost feels alive. "So the problem with existing language apps is that they teach you vocabulary but not culture," she's explaining, her brown eyes bright with passion. "My app connects users with native speakers, but not for lessons, for cultural exchange. Like, a kid in Ohio could connect with a grandmother in Naples to learn her real, authentic pasta sauce recipe. It's about connection, not just conjugation. There's never and explain, and disparate is whether until tictive leading of the business stage." I take a sip of my latte, the warmth of the ceramic mug a small comfort in my hands. I'm not just listening to her pitch, I'm auditing her soul. There's no talk of venture capital or Series B funding. There's no mention of brand synergy or market disruption. There's only a genuine, burning desire to build something that brings people together. I see that same spark I saw in David all those years ago, but this time, it's not aimed at a valuation. It's aimed at a value. That's a wonderful idea, Maya, I say, and I mean it. What are your next steps? Well, she says, biting her lip, the scholarship took care of my tuition, which is, you have no idea what a lifesaver that is. Now I just need to build the prototype. I'm working a part-time job to save up for the server costs and to hire a freelance coder to help with the back end. I reach into my purse and pull out my old checkbook. For decades, this checkbook was a tool of obligation, paying the mortgage, the electric bill, funding my son's ever-growing list of needs. Now, it feels different. It feels like a tool of creation. I write out a check and slide it across the table. Maya's eyes widen as she looks at the amount. It's not life-changing money, but it's enough. Enough to build a prototype. Enough for a seed. Carol, I can't. This is too much, she stammers, her face flushing. Yes, you can, I say gently. Consider it an investment, my first one in a new portfolio. A tear escapes her eye and rolls down her cheek. Thank you, she whispers. You don't know what this means. I promise I won't let you down. And I know she won't. Because her promise isn't leverage, it's a vow. Looking at her, at the raw, hopeful future sitting right in front of me, I finally understand. I spent 30 years as an investor in a single high-risk startup that was doomed to fail. I kept throwing good money after bad, convinced that my love alone could make it profitable. But I learned that the best investment you can ever make is in your own dignity. I learned that you have the right to defund what is breaking you and reinvest in what builds you up. It's never too late to declare a loss and pivot your entire portfolio. My life's work is no longer about balancing the books of the past. It's about funding the future, not just Maya's, but my own. So let me ask you, if your life was a company you had invested everything in and you realized the leadership was corrupt and the mission was lost, would you have the courage to stage a takeover and become your own CEO? If this story resonated with you, let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories about finding the strength to balance your own ledger.